What if the fate of David holds the key all along to understanding the FNAF universe? Well, in today's video, we're delving into the dark secrets of FNAF Secret of the Mimic and uncovering how it all links to FNAF Ruin and the greater universe. Now, believe me, you're not going to want to miss any of this as we uncover the chilling lore of David's death and what it means for the future of FNAF. And don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with everything lore related. And immediately, I'd like to start by saying this video is going to assume you know the basics of Secret of the Mimic. Now, if you don't, that's no problem. You can go and watch this video, which thoroughly explains all the lore, then come back to this. Because the one thing which has really been bugging me about Secret of the Mimic is how did David actually die? And not only that, how does it link to Tiger Rock in the basement? How does all this link to Ruin? You know, the Mimic we see in Ruin? And is there actually anything supernatural going on? Well, believe it or not, the game does actually give us all these answers. We just gotta know where to look. So let's start at the very beginning, and that's the creation of M1. And in itself, believe it or not, this is supernatural. And I know you're probably thinking, well, how is that even possible? Well, believe it or not, there's a log where Edwin actually tells us that he hears Fiona's voice over a radio when he uses a specific frequency. That frequency is 4625.
Recording. Test. Levels are good. This is where I heard it. It's her or someone that sounds like her. Set frequency to 4625.
Now, interestingly enough, that number keeps on cropping up throughout the game and even in Help Wanted 2, but I'll come back to that later. Even more interesting than that is the place where we actually find this log. The room seems to indicate this is where Edwin first built the Mimic and implies, obviously, he heard Fiona's voice in this room. It then seems highly likely that Fiona's spirit coming through on this radio frequency seems to possess the M1 endo and program. This then explains why we find a log where Edwin basically says he doesn't know why M1 seems to work, it just seems to work. Almost as if it's supernatural, right?
Every copy has failed. I don't even know why it worked the first time. But it did. It's just not ready.
So this secret audio log then where Edwin is telling us about the frequency 4625 and how he's able to talk to Fiona's ghost literally tells us that possession in 1979 is indeed possible, which brings me on to David. Now, it's highly important you listen to all this video. Whether you're a brand new FNAF fan or a returning vet, this lore is extremely important, and I'm not going to underestimate that fact. Because not only is this game the earliest point in the FNAF timeline, it also connects to the latest game in the FNAF timeline, and that is Ruin. Now, don't worry, I will get into that. Let's return back to David, because already we've kinda had the game confirm to us that possession in Secret of the Mimic is a real thing, and Fiona is indeed possessing M1. But as we know, Fiona's consciousness, which is inside of this M1 endo, gets transferred into this cradle computer, which they rename literally Fiona. The interesting thing here is, we also know this computer goes on to be MXEX. Can you see already how this is starting to link up to Ruin? But don't worry, all will become clear and I will get on to that point. So now, let's move on to David, because we've already established that hauntings in Secret of the Mimic are indeed possible. But the question here is David's ghost haunting M2? And if that's the case, how did he even die? Now you see, there are numerous logs throughout Secret of the Mimic, and no one of them outright confirms how David dies. There's one log which implies he plays a lot out in the playground just outside the factory which his father had built him, and how his lawyer kind of says it's unsafe and no one should really play out there. And that's basically it. That's the only evidence we have to go on of his death. The hint to the fact that he was in the playground and the playground was potentially unsafe. That is the only thing we have. However, there is a log from Fiona talking directly to Edwin about building a cradle to keep David safe, and how they have to stop something together. Now that to me kind of sounds like David's alive at this point, and the M2 animatronic has kind of gone haywire and they need to build a program to stop it from hurting people, as she says in the bottom of her text. Now, the reason I bring this up is because in the books, David is actually killed by a van. But I'm not following the books, nor is the game following the books, because in the books, Fiona dies during childbirth, but in the games, she's well alive a few years later. So the game is not following the books. So therefore, why are people assuming David died by being hit by a van? So let's just focus on the evidence we have in front of us right now in this game, and the game tells us that he played a lot in this playground, and at some point in time, the Mimic and him were alive together, well, M2, sorry, and M2 had become unstable, hence why they had to build this cradle to contain it and keep David safe. Now, it's at this point where things get extremely interesting, because at one point in the game, we actually see the Tiger Rock costume below the MCM factory and manor, and it clearly is supernatural in its take. And not only either. There definitely seems to be an endo inside of this Tiger Rock costume. How do I know that? Well, when it teleports around everywhere and lands on the ground, you hear that huge sound of a weight/force hitting the floor beneath it. Now, if there was no animatronic inside of this costume, it wouldn't have that weighty sound when it hits the floor. Why am I even bringing all this up? Well, if you haven't guessed it by now, I believe M2 is the actual one who killed David. I know that's hard for all you van lovers to fathom out there, but let's look at what the game presents to us objectively. And there's far more evidence to suggest that the Mimic/M2 killed David rather than some rogue van. Let's look at it logically. Throughout the factory, we see numerous people stuffed inside of mascot costumes. Now, the reason I bring that up is because we know the Mimic is clearly going around stuffing people. And inside of a Tiger Rock plush we find in Help Wanted 2, this seems to almost be flesh inside of this costume. Now, that in itself isn't great evidence because I'm taking it from another game, and I believe was a placeholder anyway, but you start to see a theme building here. And not only that, why would the Mimic even be stuffing people inside of costumes? I mean, even in one of the endings, the bad ending, he takes Arnold back to the factory and stuffs him inside of a costume, which looks vaguely familiar to the Help Wanted 2 area. Again, I'll come on to that later, but where did he learn this stuffing behavior? Well, isn't it obvious? He'd seen Murray himself or employees stuffing endoskeletons inside of the mascot costumes, which is what they were hired to do, and he decided to copy it, mimic it as his programming. And who's the first one he did this on? Potentially a staff member. That's what this log from Fiona was telling us. Keep people safe. We need to build this program to put boundaries in place, basically to stop the Mimic going around stuffing people and going outside of his programming. Unfortunately, however, they didn't finish the program/cradle. The Mimic then stuffed David inside of a mascot costume. That mascot costume was the one he loved, the Tiger Rock costume. This then literally means that David possesses the Tiger Rock mascot suit. That confidently explains its supernatural abilities down in the basement, teleporting everywhere, the eerie David lines, and how we never actually see this mascot costume anywhere else. I mean, there's numerous elephants, mushroom men, other characters, but a Tiger Rock mascot costume? Nope. But here's the really confusing thing. Has David actually possessed M2? I mean, we know from FNAF's history that when a soul possesses an animatronic, their own consciousness begins to meld with the AI. You know, for example, when you see like Circus Baby, we know Elizabeth is in there, but Circus Baby still goes around killing people in sister location, despite Elizabeth's soul still being in there. Not to mention, you just gotta look at the original animatronics, which have the kids' souls inside of them. They still go around murdering people because they're fused with the AI. Has the same thing happened with David? And we haven't even got onto the part how this links to Ruin yet. I told you this video is extremely important for the lore. You see, in my eyes, David is definitely possessing M2. I know it sounds crazy, just hear me out. As I just established, spirits can possess the animatronic but be melded with their AI. In this case, the Mimic AI literally was programmed to mimic David. So the fact that you have a spirit David and a Mimic program David in the same animatronic becomes quite confusing. We also know that FNAF is known for its tragic stories. Look at the MCI, kids stuffed in the animatronics. And here, we literally know that Edwin beat and attacked the M2 animatronic because it was acting like David. But what happens if it was David all along, possessing that M2 and at the same time, the M2's programming? You imagine little David here, stuck and possessing this animatronic, and then all of a sudden, the kid's father then attacks and beats it. What a cruel twist of fate that would be. We also know this is the case. We hear the log of Edwin attacking the Mimic.
Stop. You're not him. You're not. Stop sounding like him.
This then also explains the Moon.exe ending perfectly, where he goes from the killer M2 animatronic to the nice sweet little David animatronic. David's spirit is also in there and then gets laid to rest, hence why we see the lights go out in its eyes. Very reminiscent of the FNAF 3 endings, where we see all, the lights inside the heads go out, basically as if they're free. Same thing happens to David. He lies on the bed, his lights go out, indicating his soul's been put to rest. And how is his soul put to rest? By his father and his mother coming together as one. No violence, not fighting, tucking him into bed, telling him basically they love him. that literally soothes the spirit inside of M2. And just like the other victims, Elizabeth, the MCI victims, they can't knowingly puppeteer the animatronics. Just look at Baby and Elizabeth, for example. The key takeaway from this, however, is that David's soul has actually merged with the mimic's programming. Exactly like when Elizabeth's code merged with Circus Baby, turning her into a killer. That's my David mimic theory. However, there is another theory on this, which David was literally just killed when he was playing in his playground, either by a rogue van or something else, and then his ghost is just haunting the factory. Personally, I don't really like that and doesn't really fit with FNAF all that well. The mimic killing him and stuffing him and then him possessing stuff definitely fits with the originality of the FNAF lore, and that's the one I personally prefer. But you might be thinking, how does all this fit into Ruin? The mimic we see there looks totally different to the mimic we see here. Well, M2. And not only that, we also have the pizzeria, prototype pizzeria below this factory. How does that all fit into the lore? Well, I've got the answers to all of that, and believe it or not, the game tells us this as well. Remember when we had Security Breach come out and everyone was theorizing what ending was canon out of the 6? I mean, there's 6 literal endings, and everyone was trying to pick which one it was, when in essence, it was actually a combination of a few of them. Now, Secret of the Mimic's ending is a lot more straightforward. There's only 3 of them, and out of them 3, it only looks like 2 of them could be canon, if that. The first one being Moon.exe, the one where we soothe the mimic, tuck the mimic into bed, and David's soul is kind of put to rest. Now, you could say this ending is canon because then eventually someone can come along, find this mimic tucked into bed in the future. I mean, we could easily have William Afton seize this house. I mean, he's seizing all of MCM property. Why wouldn't he seize this house on the hill, make it his own? And it just so happens there's a mimic inside of this house, what he wanted this entire time. And for bonus, there's no longer a spirit attached to it, it's purely just the mimic's programming. This could then mean that William Afton wakes up the mimic goes to its programming without David and goes on a complete rampage. Now, that's one way you could make that ending canon, but I don't believe that to be the canon ending, and it doesn't fit with Ruin. However, the ending where we leave the MCM factory with it burning down, the house burning down, and the mimic taking the data driver does fit perfectly to Ruin. Now, hear this out, because this lore is essential for the next game, and believe it or not, the lore of Ruin. You see, think back to Ruin's ending. We find the mimic in our room, sealed in there with the MXX computer outside, which is literally the Fiona computer. The one she literally tells Murray to build to keep the mimic contained. That's exactly what we see in Ruin. And I know you're probably thinking, well, the mimic in Ruin looks totally different to the mimic we see at the ending in Secret of the Mimic. Well, that's easily explained. In the ending where everything burns down, he takes the data driver. On this data driver are the plans to everything in the MCM factory, including the prototype endoskeleton M2. The entire thing we've been after for the entire game. The one dispatch that Fiona were sending us around the entire factory to get. We literally get it, and then the mimic takes it. This means the mimic can use these plans to A, rebuild himself, B, upgrade himself, and C, make copies of himself. We also know he is highly capable of upgrading and fixing himself because he literally builds himself new legs.
Please! I can't move. I can't feel my legs. Speaking of legs, what do you think? I just finished mine. There are still a few kinks to work out.
So the parachute.exe ending is likely the canon one. Not only does everything burn down, including the house and the factory, this sets up the fact that we never see MCM as a company ever again. That's because it's literally burnt down. It's gone. This also sets up why the house on the hill, William Afton's house, the FNAF 4 house, looks slightly different in the future. Because again, that burns down, but not in its entirety. It gets rebuilt, hence why there's subtle differences in FNAF 4. Why David's bedroom looks awfully reminiscent to the bedroom in FNAF 4. Is slightly different, that's because it burnt down and William Afton rebuilt it. Not only that, this house links below ground to a massive underground bunker, exactly like the one we see in Sister Location. I mean, you see, William Afton didn't build this underground bunker below his house in Sister Location, it was already there, as shown to us in this game. He literally just repossessed the MCM Manor house and everything was all below ground anyway, even linked up perfectly to the underground factory. It even had a huge power source underground, which which we see. All this lines up perfectly with the other games, and believe it or not, so does the prototype pizzeria we see below the factory. I know that sounds wild, but it does line up. A lot of people are talking about this as being like a FNAF 1 styled area, but that's completely wrong. At first I even thought the same thing, but it's not. Looking at it closely, it actually resembles the area in Help Wanted. You know, like the main hub world where we get to choose our games. I mean, where the mimic basically comes from is where the prize counter would be. There was no safe room there. We also have the same showtime button, just like in Help Wanted. Coincidentally enough, in Secret of the Mimic, you press it, it does nothing. Why even bother to put that in? I mean, even in the bad ending, we literally have the mimic stuff us in a costume and mimic the Help Wanted 1 ending. Literally scene for scene there. But how is this entire basement pizzeria connected to Help Wanted? Well, think of Tape Girl in Help Wanted. She actually tells us that a bunch of the old parts / circuit boards came from an old abandoned pizzeria they'd found, and they scanned these circuit boards into their game as such because they didn't have the program themselves. What if these old discarded parts and circuit boards came from this prototype pizzeria? That would explain the mimic program itself. This entire prototype area screams the Help Wanted virtual area. But I know you're probably asking, how does this all link up with Ruin? We find the mimic in this abandoned room with the mascot costumes we actually see in Secret of the Mimic. They're also there in the same boxes as well, indicating this was either A, shipped to this room, which is highly unlikely, or B, was a room in the Murray's costume manor. You see, I've explained how the mimic can look different in Ruin. That's quite obvious. I mean, he has the plans to his own design. He could clearly upgrade himself as needed, and that's clearly what he's done here. He's changed some of his parts out, his legs, his arms. He's either upgraded or literally just repaired himself from a battle of such. In conclusion, it's pretty obvious. In the next DLC or game, we're going to lure the mimic back to the factory. We're going to trap him down below using the MXEX computer, or Fiona at this point, and bury him there, contained, until eventually he's found again in Ruin. I do believe all this is going to be thoroughly explained in the next game, whether it's the DLC to Ruin or an add-on for Secret of the Mimic. And as for David possessing M2, well, it's hard to know whether his spirit has been put to rest or is still inside of M2, trapped, melded with the code. As we know in nearly every FNAF game, there's never been a happy ending. Could this be the difference here? And what do you think on this entire theory? I would love to know. And don't forget, guys, this is just a theory. Don't go absolutely crazy in the comments over it. And if you enjoyed it and liked it, please hit the like and subscribe for plenty more upcoming content on FNAF. Also, I highly recommend checking out my other Secret of the Mimic videos if you haven't already done so. Massive thanks to the Fazbear employees who are on screen now, Laura and Rena Fox, Ritsu Arisu, and our Twisted Fazbear CEO Penguin Lover 12. Thanks, guys. As always, I'm Twisted Animatronic, and stay safe out there, superstars.